Good news in Chicago. As of right now, the city will no longer be shutting off a resident's water supply because of unpaid utility bills, which is an absolute nightmare and crisis in other parts of the country. Mayor Lori Lightfoot said access to water is a basic human right that too many Chicagoans have had to go without because they have had to choose between paying the utility bills and paying for other needs. This new policy will also provide pathways for residents to settle their utility debts by paying a discounted rate of 50% for water service, sewer, and water sewer tax bills. After 1 year of meeting the discounted payments, the city would forgive previously incurred debt. And on this policy change, the mayor said, "Our families deserve to live their lives without the constant financial stress imposed by city government. They need a pathway to compliance to be able to pay their bills." And I get that people need to pay their bills, but the idea that in America we would cut off people's literal water.
Yeah, but we do that, and we've done, this is.
We do, and it's happening in Detroit, son, yeah.
Yeah, water, electricity, things that we shouldn't, like kids shouldn't have to experience this because their parents are struggling to pay, to pay their bills. This is fantastic, and I wish everybody across the country would adopt this.
Yeah, and we see, I think, like this sort of approach where we believe that government, like there's a lot of people come in and say government should be run like a business.
Right.
Okay, that's one way to do it. Another is that government should recognize the fundamental humanity of everyone lives in the country and should not arrange itself in a way that increases the likelihood that people will starve to death, get exposed to winter, those sorts of things.
Right, and people are like, oh, nobody's gonna pay for their water now. That's ridiculous, it's not gonna happen like that. And people aren't not paying their water bill because they just want fun money. They can't afford it, and this is gonna help those people.
Yeah, so it's people from the outside looking at that and saying, these people are probably just buying fun stuff, like you said. They're just they're buying drugs or they're having fun rather than paying their obligation. And it's unfortunately, it's the product of decades of right-wing media teaching people to not see other groups, especially in other parts of the country, as human. You're willing to look at them and say, well, they're not actually like me. They're not reacting to a financial crisis the way I would. They're just being irresponsible.
Yep.
And I appreciate politicians changing that approach at least somewhat. Now, this is also, there was a similar policy change back in July. Lightfoot said similar reforms would be made to the city's parking ticket program when she announced the city would stop suspending drivers' licenses for unpaid tickets and make it easier for drivers to access payment plans to settle ticket debt. And the thing is, if you don't have water in your house, it becomes very difficult to live. If you can't drive, it becomes fundamentally more difficult to pay off your parking tickets. If you can't get to work because you can't drive, or if you suddenly need to pay for transportation every day. Like you've experienced having to use Uber and it's pretty expensive. And if you already can't meet your financial obligations, let's not make it more difficult for you to do so. Like locking people up, that makes it more difficult for them to pay off their debts when they lose their job because they're in prison for a week.
I agree.
It's a fundamental difference in approach to government, and I like to see people, like we had this era of compassionate conservatism and the values Republicans and things like that. They value different things. I appreciate people who value humanity and believe that government should be there to serve the interests of the people, not to be a stick that's wielded against them in every possible way. Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.